There are nights at the World Cup when beautiful football doesn't matter. The passes don't have to be perfect. The scoreline doesn't have to be convincing. The statistics don't tell the whole story. Sometimes surviving is enough. And for France, this was one of those nights. On paper, a one-goal victory over Paraguay might not look particularly memorable. Many people will glance at the result, see France in the quarterfinals, and move on without a second thought. But anyone who watched all 90 minutes knows this was far more complicated than the scoreboard suggests. France weren't outplayed. They weren't lucky. But they were pushed into a completely different kind of football match than they expected. Paraguay arrived with a plan, and for more than an hour they executed it almost perfectly. Every attack was slowed down. Every passing lane was contested. Every French player was forced to think twice before moving the ball forward. It wasn't spectacular football, but it was incredibly disciplined. Eventually, one moment changed everything. A run into the penalty area, a desperate challenge, a VAR review, and then Kylian Mbappé stepped forward with the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. One kick, one goal, one place in the quarterfinals. But here's the question that matters far more than the result itself. Did France prove they're genuine World Cup favorites? Or did they expose weaknesses that stronger opponents will be ready to exploit? Welcome back to Goal Theory. Today we're breaking down everything that happened in France's hard-fought 1-0 victory over Paraguay. From the tactical battle and the key moments to the individual performances and what this result tells us about France's chances of lifting the World Cup. Because sometimes the most important matches aren't the ones you win comfortably, they're the ones that force you to discover something about yourself. From the opening whistle, France looked exactly as most people expected. Confident, patient, comfortable in possession. Didier Deschamps resisted the temptation to make dramatic tactical changes after the group stage. Instead, France stayed true to the structure that had brought them this far. Their shape allowed the midfield to circulate possession quickly, while the fullbacks pushed higher to stretch Paraguay's defensive line. The intention was obvious. Move the ball quickly enough to pull Paraguay out of position before creating space for runners in behind. The problem was, Paraguay refused to move. Rather than pressing high, they settled into an organized defensive block that compressed the center of the pitch. Every time France attempted to play through midfield, another Paraguayan shirt appeared. The distances between defenders were remarkably small. There was almost no space between the defensive line and midfield. France could enjoy possession. What they couldn't enjoy was freedom. For the first 15 minutes, the pattern barely changed. France controlled the ball. Paraguay controlled the space. That distinction became the story of the evening. Possession statistics often create the illusion of dominance, but possession without penetration rarely unsettles disciplined defenses. Paraguay understood this perfectly. They were willing to let France complete passes in harmless areas as long as dangerous central zones remained protected. It required enormous concentration. One player stepping out too early could have opened a gap. One defender following the wrong runner might have changed the game. Yet Paraguay remained impressively organized. Their defensive discipline frustrated France far more than many people expected. As the minutes passed, another interesting pattern began to emerge. France's attacks increasingly drifted toward the wings. Normally, that's not a problem, but against a compact defensive block, endless crosses often become exactly what the defending team wants. Paraguay's central defenders looked comfortable dealing with aerial deliveries. Instead of creating clear opportunities, France found themselves recycling possession again and again. The crowd could sense it. The game wasn't becoming chaotic, it was becoming patient. Almost too patient. This is where knockout football differs from league football. In a domestic season, a draw can sometimes feel acceptable. At the World Cup, every minute without a breakthrough increases pressure, not panic. Pressure. Players begin wondering whether they're moving the ball quickly enough, whether they should take more risks, whether the obvious pass is actually the right one. Those thoughts are invisible to supporters watching at home, but they're very real on the pitch. Paraguay wanted France to reach that point, and for long spells of the first half, they did. Despite enjoying far more possession, France rarely forced Paraguay's goalkeeper into genuinely difficult saves. The final pass often arrived a fraction too late. The first touch occasionally carried the ball too far. Small details prevented promising moves from becoming real chances. That's what made Paraguay's performance so impressive. They didn't simply defend deep. They defended intelligently. Every player understood exactly where to be. Whenever one defender stepped forward, another immediately covered the space behind. Whenever France attempted quick combinations around the penalty area, passing lanes disappeared almost instantly. It wasn't negative football. It was organized football. An organization wins knockout matches far more often than people realize. One of the biggest reasons Paraguay remained competitive was their willingness to stay emotionally disciplined. Many underdogs lose concentration after spending long periods without the ball. Paraguay never did. They accepted that France would dominate possession. They accepted that defending would be exhausting. What they refused to accept was losing their shape. That mentality deserves enormous credit. At the other end, Paraguay weren't simply waiting for penalties. Whenever opportunities appeared to counterattack, they committed players forward with surprising confidence. They knew they wouldn't create many chances, which meant every transition had to matter. France's defenders were forced to stay alert throughout the first half because one misplaced pass could instantly become a dangerous break in the opposite direction. Those moments served as reminders that the match remained delicately balanced. For France, patience became the most valuable quality on the pitch. For Paraguay, belief grew with every passing minute. The longer the score stayed level, the more dangerous the contest became for the favorites. And perhaps that's where this match started to become psychological. France weren't creating panic, but they weren't creating separation either. The longer Paraguay survived, the more confidence spread through their team. Every successful clearance earned encouragement. Every interception reinforced belief. Every blocked shot felt almost as valuable as a goal. Momentum in football isn't always built through attacking. Sometimes it's built through resisting. France were beginning to discover exactly how difficult knockout football can become when an opponent refuses to make mistakes. And as halftime approached, one question lingered over the stadium. Would France eventually find the breakthrough? Or were Paraguay quietly dragging one of the tournament favorites into exactly the kind of match they wanted? Halftime didn't bring panic inside the French dressing room. It brought perspective. Didier Deschamps had seen matches like this before. International tournaments are rarely won by the team that plays the most attractive football every 90 minutes. They're won by teams that recognize when a game demands patience instead of urgency. France weren't being outclassed. They simply weren't asking enough difficult questions of Paraguay's defense. The challenge wasn't possession, it was penetration. The second half began with noticeably greater intent. France increased the speed of their passing, particularly through midfield. Instead of allowing Paraguay time to reset after every phase of play, they tried to move the ball one or two touches quicker. Fullbacks pushed even higher, forcing Paraguay's wide midfielders to defend deeper and limiting their ability to launch counterattacks. The tactical adjustment wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. But subtle changes often decide knockout matches. Paraguay, to their credit, didn't abandon the plan that had carried them through the opening 45 minutes. Their defensive lines remained compact, communication stayed excellent, and every player continued sacrificing individual freedom for the structure of the team. As the hour mark approached, another factor began influencing the game: fatigue. Defending continuously against one of the world's strongest attacks demands extraordinary concentration. Every sprint back into position, every tackle, every clearance slowly drains both physical energy and mental sharpness. This is where elite squads often separate themselves from the rest. Not because their starting 11 is significantly better, because their bench can change the rhythm of a match. Recognizing that France needed more movement between the lines, Deschamps introduced fresh legs. One of the substitutes, Désiré Doué, immediately offered something different. Rather than receiving the ball with his back to goal, he attacked space aggressively, forcing Paraguay's defenders into decisions they hadn't needed to make earlier in the evening. Sometimes a substitute doesn't change a match through goals or assists. Sometimes he changes it simply by asking new questions. Doué did exactly that. His direct running stretched Paraguay's defensive block in ways France had struggled to achieve before. The spaces remained small, but for the first time, They actually existed. And then came the moment that changed everything. A quick attacking move carried France into the penalty area. Doué attacked the loose space with confidence, attempting to reach the ball before the recovering defender. Under immense pressure, a challenge arrived just a fraction too late. Play continued briefly. The stadium hesitated. French players appealed immediately. Paraguayan defenders insisted they had done nothing wrong. Then came the signal everyone in modern football recognizes: VAR. For supporters inside the stadium, those few moments probably felt far longer than they actually were. One replay, another angle, then another. The referee returned to the pitch and pointed directly toward the penalty spot. Paraguay's resistance had finally cracked, not through a spectacular team goal, not through individual brilliance, but through sustained pressure that eventually forced a decisive mistake. Of course, winning a penalty doesn't guarantee anything. Some of the greatest players in football history have watched World Cup penalties fly over crossbars or crash into goalkeepers' gloves. The pressure is different. Everyone knows it. Thousands inside the stadium fall silent. Millions watching around the world stop breathing for a moment. One kick suddenly feels much bigger than 11 meters. Kylian Mbappé walked forward carrying all of that expectation. His body language never changed. No unnecessary celebration before the kick. No hesitation. Just complete focus. He placed the ball carefully, stepped back, waited for the whistle, and delivered exactly what France needed. Goal. No wild celebration, mostly relief, because everyone wearing blue understood just how difficult this match had become. The goal transformed the tactical picture instantly. For 70 minutes, France had been searching for a way through. Now Paraguay faced a completely different challenge. They could no longer remain comfortably inside their defensive shell. For the first time all evening, they needed to attack. That inevitably created spaces. As Paraguay pushed more players forward, France suddenly looked far more dangerous on the counterattack. The same compact shape that had frustrated France for most of the match gradually opened as Paraguay searched for an equalizer. Yet this is another area where France deserved credit. They didn't lose control after taking the lead. Too often, teams score in knockout football and immediately retreat too deep, inviting relentless pressure. France avoided that mistake. Instead of abandoning possession, they continued circulating the ball intelligently, forcing Paraguay to chase without allowing the game to become chaotic. It wasn't spectacular, it was mature. The final 15 minutes became less about attacking brilliance and more about game management. France slowed the tempo when necessary. They pressed at sensible moments. They committed tactical fouls when transitions looked dangerous. Every decision reflected experience. Paraguay continued fighting until the final whistle, refusing to accept defeat. Long balls into the penalty area, hopeful crosses, second ball battles. They threw everything they had at France. But the French backline responded calmly. Clearances were decisive. Communication remained constant. There was no unnecessary panic. By the time the referee blew the final whistle, the scoreline still read 1-0. A narrow victory, but one that carried enormous significance. For Paraguay, elimination will hurt. Yet they leave this tournament with considerable respect. They defended courageously, remained disciplined for long stretches, and forced one of the tournament favorites to work for every single opportunity. Performances like this remind us why knockout football can never be taken for granted. For France, however, this victory raises an interesting debate. Did they look unstoppable? No. Did they look convincing for every minute? Not really. But perhaps those aren't the questions that matter most. The better question is this: did France demonstrate the qualities required to survive difficult knockout matches? I think the answer is yes. Championship-winning teams aren't remembered because every victory was comfortable. They're remembered because they found solutions when comfort disappeared. France found one. Mbappé will naturally receive most of the headlines, and rightly so. He accepted the responsibility of the decisive penalty and converted it with remarkable composure. But this wasn't solely his victory. It was also a triumph of patience, of tactical discipline, of trusting the process even when frustration threatened to take over. Deschamps deserves recognition as well. His substitutions altered the rhythm without disrupting the team's balance. Introducing fresh attacking movement eventually produced the breakthrough France had been searching for. That's the value of tournament management. Sometimes coaches don't need revolutionary ideas. They simply need the courage to make the right adjustment at exactly the right moment. Now France's attention turns to Morocco, and that may present an even greater challenge. Morocco have already shown throughout this tournament that they are organized, fearless, and exceptionally difficult to break down. If France repeat the slow attacking tempo they displayed for large periods against Paraguay, Morocco will almost certainly believe they can produce another upset. The margin for error continues shrinking. Every round becomes more demanding. Every opponent becomes more dangerous. That's the nature of the World Cup. As the tournament moves toward its conclusion, style becomes less important than survival. France survived. Whether they can raise their level in the quarterfinals may ultimately determine whether this generation lifts another World Cup trophy. So what did you make of France's performance? Was this the display of a champion who simply found a way to win? Or do you think Paraguay exposed weaknesses that Morocco can exploit? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy thoughtful football analysis that looks beyond the final score, subscribe to Goal Theory, leave a like if you enjoyed this breakdown, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next World Cup analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.